Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, Fish Den 365. I'm Den Haring, and today we're going to be talking about squarebill crankbaits and lipless crankbaits. So the squarebill and the lipless, two of the most popular springtime baits that you can fish. These baits catch fish year-round, both of them do, but spring is when both really shine. There are some similarities to these baits, and there are some critical differences with these baits as well. Today, on Fish Den 365, we're going to compare and contrast the squarebill crankbait with the lipless crankbait. Both great springtime baits. We're going to show you when and where and how to fish each one of these great springtime baits. And along the way, we'll go over some of my specific favorite brands and types of both the lipless and the squarebill. I fish a lot of different ones. Certainly, what you should know about both of these baits is that there are tons of them on the market. The lipless crankbait, nearly every company has one, and the squarebill is catching up that way too. There's just a ton of them out there, and they all catch fish. All of them catch fish. All I can do is tell you the ones that I like the best for me, that have had the best success for me. And I'm sure I haven't even, there might be one out there that I haven't tried yet that is excellent for me. There's just that many out there. I'm constantly trying new ones. This is a new one right here we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so it's just how it is, and looking forward to fishing all these different squarebills and lipless crankbaits. All right, so we're going to get started by talking about the squarebill crankbait first. We're going to go into some of the details about this bait, then we'll talk about the lipless, and we'll just go into a comparison of the two and how we fish them. Okay, so the squarebill crankbait, first thing to focus in on is, as its name suggests, it has a square bill. It's squared off. And the thing that makes that unique is that when you have a square bill shape rather than a round shape, this tends to come off of cover better. It will come off of wood better. It'll come out of weeds better. It hits those weeds and deflects off them. And when it deflects, the bait will move in a way that triggers aggressive strikes. Because of the squarebill's action, it elicits some of the most aggressive strikes you'll experience. It's really one of those types of baits. Squarebills typically will float at rest. They don't dive very deeply, mostly between 2 and 4 feet deep. Some are shallower. There might be some that go down to 8 feet, but in general, 2 to 4 to 6 feet deep is the maximum depth on the squarebill. So it's meant to be fished in shallow water around shallow cover. And you can do a number of things with the squarebill. You can bounce it off cover. You can try and fish it through weeds. And even in more open water, you can use a very aggressive retrieve, stop and go, where you're reeling fast and stopping, reeling fast, stop. 2 retrieves, 2 turns of rotations of the reel handle, stop. 5 rotations, stop. That kind of thing. And what that'll do is it makes the bait act erratic. It'll dive, stop, float up a little bit, dive, stop. And as it's doing that, it's moving different ways. And when it's stopping and going, it has a particular action in the water that really makes those fish aggressively strike the bait. In spring, it's one of the first baits that I'll throw. Both of these baits, they're very good. As soon as the ice is off the water, you can start catching fish with these. And the squarebill is one that I'll throw early on. And what I look for early on is shallow rock. I really like to throw this bait in rocks where you have shallow riprap. Anywhere you can find rock on the bank that extends out into the water, but still kind of shallow. You want some deep water nearby because the bass will use that deep water to get into the shallows. But this time of year, you'd be surprised, even though that water is extremely cold, that shallow water is warming up faster because of the sunlight. So the sun's hitting that, and for whatever reason they like the rocks. Some theorize that the rocks absorb a little more heat, and so that water's a little warmer. I don't know if that's true or not. All I know is this thing is a dynamite bait to use over shallow rock in spring. So I will just cover, and that's the nice thing about both of these baits. Again, you can cover a ton of water with them. And so in spring, when the bass move up, they don't just move up everywhere. They move up in groups. And oftentimes they'll be in certain areas. So a group will move up into a certain area. And unless you're covering the water, you may never find those fish. So these are excellent tools to cover water and to find them. And so that's why that this Squarebill crankbait is an excellent choice in the spring like this, because you can cover a ton of water with it, and yet it fishes good and through cover, fishes good through rock and through wood and through all the different kinds of cover out there. Now, oftentimes, if you can find rock, with sometimes you'll have a situation where you'll have rock real shallow right off the bank, and then some weeds just a little bit deeper, and oftentimes they're on the inside edge of the weeds. In other words, not the deep side of the weeds, but on the inside edge where those rocks are in spring. I've found this to be the case, especially on sunny days where you have maybe a little bit of a warming trend, or the temperature is stable. That's when they'll get in there real shallow. And I'm talking just a foot or two of water, not deep at all. They'll get in there, and these Squarebills can really be dynamite then. Okay, let me tell you some of the Squarebills that I really like to fish. I'm going to start with the one that I started with first, that I really started catching a lot of fish on. This one. Most Squarebills are silent. They don't have rattles. Some do. We're going to show you some that do and some that don't. But this is a Strike King Squarebill. You can see it's got a good size, and this particular color I really like. The orange belly, a little bit of red, olive back. A great springtime color. I caught one of my biggest smallmouths on this bait years ago. And this is the Strike King Squarebill. Real nice. I think this is a 2.5, I think it's called. And so this has caught me a lot of fish over the years. It's scratched up and beat up pretty much, but I still fish it because it just catches fish. One of the ones I started last year using and catching a lot of fish that I was really impressed with is the Rocco. This is the Rapala Otts Garage Rocco. And this bait, one of the unique things about this bait, it's got that circuit board lip, is as soon as you begin to just turn that reel handle, it immediately begins working. It doesn't take long for it to start to wiggle. Some of these baits, they take a little bit longer, that you have to move them through the water a little bit before they begin to produce an action. This one, as soon as you start reeling, it just starts working and moving. And I caught a lot of bass on this one last year. This particular color, too. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's clearly a crayfish pattern with that red belly, orangish sides, brown back. Very good color. This is another color that I like. It's a little brighter on the belly, that dark green back. If the water's clear, I'll usually go to something like this. Another nice, all these are crawdad type colors. And the Rocco, this year they've come out with a bigger one. Last year, the only size you can get was this one. This year, they've come out with this larger size. And so I'm looking forward to fishing the larger size this year, because maybe this caught big bass last year, but maybe this will catch even bigger ones. Well, I can't talk about Squarebill crankbaits without talking about the Lucky Craft Squarebill, right? This is Lucky Craft. They have excellent colors and a very good Squarebill. Again, this one, no rattles. But boy, does it work. It catches big fish. This one I like to throw a little bit later in spring. Both the Strike King and the Lucky Craft, as springtime progresses a little bit, I get to throwing these more. They're bigger, they have a bigger profile, and they catch quite a few fish for me. And Lucky Craft has some really great colors out there. Good bluegill imitations, good sunfish, good shad. This is a nice shad imitation here, as you can see. But the Lucky Craft is a good one. Another one of the newer ones on the market that I started fishing last year and am really impressed with is the Lewis ATV all-terrain vehicle. And the reason why they call it the ATV is because you can fish this through, if you have fallen trees, this thing is amazing. You could fish it through trees and just reel it right through it. It just comes through it. It very, very rarely hangs up in brush. That's where its strength is. It's meant to be thrown around brush. It'll work around rocks and weeds too, but it's really good in brush. You can just throw this along a lay-down tree, and you can, if that lay-down's like this, you could actually go and throw it this way and still come through it. But I like to throw it with the trunk of those trees, because, usually the bass are set up closer to the trunks. But either way, it comes through those V's in the branches and comes through the branches very, very well. And yet it still does a great job at hooking the fish. There's something about the design of the lip angle and the shape of the bait. I don't know how they did it, but boy, it comes through cover. It comes through wood really well. So if you have a situation where you're fishing a lot of fallen trees, this is one that you definitely want to have, the ATV by Bill Lewis. And they come in 3 different sizes. This is 2 of the sizes here. This is the little one, medium size, and there's even a bigger one. I just don't have it with me at the moment. Great baits, catch a lot of fish, especially in that cover situation. And then I'm gonna, and now these do have a little bit of a knocker in there. You can hear that. So they have a little bit of sound too. So that sound can help draw fish, especially around heavy cover, or when you have a situation where maybe the water's a little more stained or dirty. And the last Squarebill that I'll show you here, this is a nice perch pattern. This is a River2Sea Biggie, and I think this comes in a size, two different sizes as well, but I'm not sure. But this is a little bit of a different shape than the standard. You see, it's a little more elongated, and that gives it just a little bit of a different action. It still has that Squarebill, but the River2Sea Biggie is a good bait. This thing catches fish. It has a really, really nice action. You can impart your own action on this thing, making it stop and go. You don't even need to hit cover with it, and it really has that crazy action. So another good fish catcher here, and this one has a loud one knocker in it. So the Biggie is another one that I really like. Okay, let's switch over to the Lipless Crankbait now. Now, the Lipless Crankbait is the more versatile of these two baits, and the reason for that is you can fish it in a much larger column of the water, depth column, from a few feet of water down to 25, 30 feet. You can fish deep, mid-range, or shallow with the Lipless Crankbait, and that makes it very versatile. Most Lipless Crankbaits are known to have these types of rattles in them, but you can get some of these that are silent, and we'll talk about some of the advantages that sometimes a silent Lipless Crankbait can be a killer as well. And there's different ways to fish Lipless Crankbaits too, in that they're more versatile than the Squarebill in this way too, because you can fish a Lipless Crankbait horizontally like a Squarebill, but you can also fish it vertically. You can jig it up and down and yo-yo the bait, and you can do something in between. And we're going to talk about all three of those types of retrieves and which baits fit those retrieves, because some are meant to be more horizontal, some more vertical. We'll talk about that as we go through the different baits. But the Lipless Crankbait, another great springtime bait. That loud rattle calls fish from a distance. Sometimes there's a time and a place for the silent ones. One of the ways that I like to fish a Lipless Crankbait is around weed beds. And so what I like to do is fish it just skimming the tops of those weed beds. And sometimes you want to get that thing just hung up into the weed bed, just along the tops. And then when it hangs, you rip it. You just pull your rod real hard. You snap your rod up, and it rips out of that weed bed, and it makes that loud rattle, and then it starts to settle back down. And oftentimes when it settles right before you begin to retrieve again, that's when they'll ram it. And again, very much like the Squarebill, some of the hardest strikes, some of the most aggressive strikes you'll receive is on the Lipless Crankbaits. It's just amazing how hard they can hit this bait, and that makes it fun to fish. I like that type of fishing. I like where you're throwing and you're active and you're retrieving, power fishing. And when the fish are just smashing it and very aggressively eating it, that's a really fun way to fish. And the Lipless Crankbait can do that for you. So weed beds is one great way to fish the bait. There's a number of Lipless Crankbaits that fish differently, so I'm going to talk about them as we go through. So we talked about weed beds and shallow, right? Shallow water, another great bait to cover large expanses of water while you're trying to find fish. The Lipless Crankbait is geared for that. And so for the shallow water bites, there's some that I like more than others, and it's because of the way they work in the water and how heavy they are. The first one is one of the originals, and that is the Bill Lewis Rattle Trap. These are half-ounce rattle traps. These baits are really suited well for shallow water. A few feet, I'll say 1 foot to I won't fish this much deeper than 8 feet because it just doesn't get down that well. It doesn't stay down very well. So maybe 1 to 8 feet in that real good range is like 2 to 6 foot range is really where this Lipless Crankbait, the rattle trap, comes into play. Ripping it through weeds. Again, I fish it very similarly to the Squarebill, where I'm reeling really fast, stop, go, but I'm not reeling consistent. You can do that. You can burn it as fast as you can, and sometimes they'll eat that. But more often than not, they like to stop and go. They like this thing to go, and then they want this thing going like crazy and then diving off, coming up and then diving back down, because when you stop and go, it flutters. It'll do this. It's moving. It flutters, and then it goes back down. And oftentimes, you could force the fish to bite without bouncing into cover by just reeling fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. 1, 2, stop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, stop. This is what you're doing with the reel handle, and you could do that real fast. You could also do that slowly. You still do that cadence though. You reel slower and stop. That'll keep the bait down a little deeper, if the water's real cold and the fish don't want to move very quickly, it could be better at that time of year. But you still want to vary the retrieve, whether you've got a fast retrieve or a medium retrieve or slow. You have to remember all that. You want to vary it as you want to stop go quite a bit with these baits, and they'll catch you more fish if you're fishing that way more often in general. So lipless crankbait, rattle traps, great in shallow water. Another one that I really like, and you have to try these because they sound different, and some days the fish want one and some days they want the other. This is the Cordell Spot. And this is a great little bait. I've caught so many fish on this one in particular. This one I hope I never lose. You can see, I don't know if you can see this, but it's really, really beat up because I've used it for so many years. And this is one of those ones that in my mind there's something different about it. They like this one. You know, more, I can buy 10 of this color, which I can't find anymore. But if I could find 10 of this color, but this one will catch more than the other 9. That's just sometimes you'll find that in a certain bait, and when you do, you don't want to lose those baits because they just catch fish, and this is one of them. I caught fish. I've had this for probably 20 years, maybe longer, maybe 30 years, and it just still catches fish today the way it did way back then. So many different lakes, so many good memories. It's a great bait. But the Spot is another one where you won't break the bank. It's only a couple bucks. They don't cost much, but they won't fish deep. They're meant to be in shallow water. They're kind of light for their size. They're not as heavy as some of these other ones we're going to go into. And so you want to fish this again in that 2 to 6 to no more than 8 feet deep, because it just won't. It doesn't apply very well to water deeper than that. Now you could yo-yo these baits, down to 12 feet, ripping them up off the bottom and let them go back down. But I think there's better suited baits to do that, and we'll talk about that soon. Before we get off of the Cordell and the rattle trap, I want to mention another rattle trap here that I've missed. This is a 3/4 ounce lipless rattle trap. It's called Smoky Joe. I've caught a lot of fish on this color and this pattern. The 3/4 ounce allows me to fish deeper weed beds, maybe closer to that 6 to 7 to 8 foot range. So that's when I'll use the 3/4 rattle trap. And then I'll mention one other one here for that more of that shallow water bite. This one has a 1-knocker in it. I just started using this last year. This is the Storm Arashi Vibe 07. The Storm Arashi Vibe 07. And I caught quite a few on this last spring. I like this bait. I was ripping it through weeds, fishing 2, 4 to 6 feet of water. Good bait for that. So now we talk about maybe going a little bit deeper. These baits I haven't fished yet, but I'm looking forward to fishing these. This is the new Berkeley Jack. You can see it's no bigger than those rattle traps, but they're heavier for their size. They're going to stay down deeper. So these will be good for that mid-depth range, right? 8 to 12 foot range, where I might want to fish along the bottom slowly or stop and go in that deeper range, or even ripping it off the bottom. Just, you'd rip your rod up and you let it go back down, just like you're fishing a jigging spoon or a blade bait. You can fish lipless crankbaits that way too, and they catch a lot of fish. So looking forward to using the Jack this year. Going a little bit bigger and a little bit deeper. These are two that I really like. The Lucky Craft LV 500, LV Max 500. These are really good baits for keeping down near the bottom in deeper water and for doing that yo-yo technique. This is another lipless crankbait that I like for the deeper water. This is the Jackal TN70, and this one I like to throw this out in deeper water, rip it and then let it just go back down, rip it and let it go down to the bottom. I've caught a lot of nice fish doing that on the Jackal. Now there's another bait made by Rapala called the Rapala Rip and Wrap. This one is a little bit different than the others. It's got that rattle. It comes in a bunch of different sizes. Here's a tiny one, and here's a nice bigger one. These are meant to rip also, and you can either rip these straight up and yo-yo them like a jig, like you're doing a jigging spoon or a blade bait, or you can rip it horizontally. So you throw it a long way out there, you let it go to the bottom, and you rip it, it goes forward and goes to the bottom, and then you rip it again. So these are good for deeper water, and these catch a lot of fish. They have a real narrow profile, which I like, almost like a blade bait, and they have a lot of good action. I've caught a lot of fish on these. They have really loud rattles in them. and even the little ones. Now, I want to mention something about this Rapala Rip and Wrap. They once made one like this. This is my last one. It's the same bait. It's the Rapala Rip and Wrap, but it's a silent version. They don't make it anymore. Most people don't know that they ever even made one, but they did, and I had some bigger ones, and I caught some really big fish on those silent ones. So if you're out there and you have some of these, or you know where I can get a Rip and Wrap silent, let me know, because the thing is a fish catcher. So when to use silent versus rattling? On pressured lakes where a lot of people are fishing lipless crankbaits over time in the spring, I think they start to lose their luster a little bit, and that's when a silent lipless crankbait can come in play and catch fish where the loud ones are not working as effectively anymore. So I like to play with that. I always start with the rattling ones, especially in early spring. But if I find that I'm not catching fish, or that a lot of other people are throwing it and the fish are starting to get pressured, that's when I'll go to one of these silent ones. And this is one that I just bought this year and I'm looking forward to use. It's called the Thunderhawk Sergeant. It looks like shaped like a crappie, and you'll see no rattle in this one. They come with really nice colors on them. There's several color packages they have, and one really unique thing on this one is the hook hangers rotate. Both of them, the belly and the back. Why is that a good thing? That's a good thing because the hook will rotate, and if you hook a fish, they're not likely to be able to wedge off of the hook with their, because sometimes that'll happen where the fish will hang the hook up in a certain way and they'll wedge right off of it and they'll come off. They won't be able to do that because both of these hook hangers are free spinning. And so a very cool design made by the Thunderhawk lure company here, the Thunderhawk Sergeant. I'm looking forward to throwing this one this spring. So those are some of my favorite lipless crankbaits. Okay, so let's just talk about some key differences between the baits. Squarebill crankbait floats at rest, dives, meant to be fished entirely shallow, 8 feet and less. Lipless crankbait, it sinks like a rock as soon as it hits the water. You can fish this shallow in a foot or two of water, but you can also fish them deep, depending on which one you choose for the situation. More versatile, much more noisy, noisier profile. The lipless crankbait is narrow. The Squarebills have that fatter shape to them, more bulbous, fatter shape. Let the fish tell you which one they're preferring on any given day. Both are excellent springtime lures. The lipless crankbaits are surprisingly snag resistant when fishing along the bottom, and it's because most of them will be in this position when they're on the bottom, and you'd be surprised. You can bump these along down there and not hang them up very often. They will hang up on wood, however, and that's when some of these Squarebills, like the specialized ATV, come into play. I would not throw a lipless crankbait into a brush pile. It's probably not going to come through there very well, but the ATV will. So another way to compare and contrast these baits. Both baits do well in weed beds. Both baits catch fish very well, ripping them out of weed beds. The lipless crank, you want to set that up so it's getting just near the tops of them. It hangs up a little bit. You rip it out. As soon as you rip it out, it goes back down a little bit. You start to reel, and boom, they're on. The Squarebill, you just erratically fish it right through those weed beds. It comes through weeds quite well, most of these. Both of these baits do well around rock, especially in spring. We've already talked about how I like to throw that Squarebill around rock. The lipless can do well around rock as well. So, if you're not catching them on the Squarebill, try a lipless before you leave that area. I also like to use the same rod and line sizes for both of these baits. The rod I like to use is not a long one. I'm not a tall person. I'm pretty short. So for me, a 6.5 foot rod or a 6 foot 8 inch rod is perfect for throwing these baits. Mainly because I'm usually throwing them, I'm not usually bombing them as long as I can bomb them. I'm fishing them around cover, specific stuff like rocks and brush and that kind of thing. So especially the Squarebill, I'm throwing that thing around, and so a 6.5 foot rod, 6 foot 8 inch rod does very well and allows me to cast the bait accurately around the cover and catch fish that way. And I like the same rod for the lipless crankbait. The lipless crankbait is shaped in such a way where you can throw it a country mile no matter what rod you're using, as long as it's the right action rod. And then the line I like to use is generally, I'll use fluorocarbon for both of these. I'll use a braided line. Usually that's 20-pound test, and then I'll use a leader. Maybe a couple rod lengths long of leader, and that leader for both of these is going to be fluorocarbon. I like Seagar line, the Invisex line I like a lot, and that could be anywhere from generally 10-pound test to 15-pound test. I usually don't go higher than 15, and most of the time I don't go lower than 10. And I'll choose that line based on how deep I want the bait to be able to go to. In the case of the Squarebill, how deep I want it to dive to. In the case of the lipless, how deep I want to keep it down when I'm fishing. The smaller the line, the 10-pound test, smaller diameter, the deeper the baits will go, and the deeper water you'll be able to maintain in that retrieve. Most of the time, I'm throwing them on 15-pound test. Sometimes 12, sometimes 10. But if I am day in and day out, I like that heavier line to be throwing these baits on, because I'm moving them pretty quickly, and I'm using fluorocarbon. I don't think the fish get a good view of that line anyway. I'm fishing around cover a lot of times with these baits, and so it seems to be a really good line choice for me. But I will go down to 12 or 10 depending on what I want the bait to do, how far down I want it to go. Okay, so we compared and contrasted two of the best springtime baits you can throw. The Squarebill crankbait, the lipless crankbait. Both are excellent baits. If not fished these in spring, I encourage you to try them this year. The ice is going to be coming off the water here quickly where I live. Hopefully I'll be out there maybe starting next week. These will be some of the baits that I'll be throwing right away, because they catch fish this time of year. And I would love to know what your experience is with these. So please comment. Let me know what you think. Do I have this right with what I said about the lipless and the Squarebill? What are some of your favorite brands and types of lipless crankbaits and Squarebill crankbaits? Love to hear that. Please comment and let me know in the comments. And if you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you want to see a great video on a really good trailer that I like to use on a chatterbait, take a look at this one here. Hardly anyone uses this trailer, and it works fantastic. Take a look. Till next time, be safe out there. Hope to see you on the water, and as always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.